Yep. So, on a more historical, philosophical
Yes.
note, right? You wrote this, or you're writing this
Hmm.
article. You'll have to check back on ztitic.news. Check our Instagram, ztitic underscore news underscore network on Instagram, and we'll make a post when that drops, when you drop it.
Hmm.
But you included some videos, and
Oh yeah.
you wanted to highlight this. You want to set up this clip here?
Yes. Okay. So this is W.G. Tarpley back in the, I believe it was a late '90s lecture that was reposted, and he's talking about the Venetian period, where they were one of the mightiest naval forces in the world and had an oligarchical system of power that basically manipulated the sciences of its time and dovetailed it with a bunch of misanthropic elite policies that they wanted to implement. And their governing philosophy back in the, 14th through late 16th century was alarmingly similar to a lot of the rhetoric we hear today about planetary carrying capacity and how we're ultimately a net negative on the surface of the terraqueous orb we fantasize as our homeworld. But I, I like this investigative treatment of the topic from a philosophical, historical vantage point. I think Tarpley does a good job here.
Now, Francesco Zorzi was the envoy of this group to Henry VIII, to whom he became the resident sex advisor. Zorzi illustrates the typical profile of a Venetian intelligence operative in the early 1500s. He was a Franciscan friar, but his main occupation was black magic of the Rosicrucian variety. He was a conjurer, a necromancer, an apparitionist. If you think of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus conjuring up the devil, you have the portrait of Zorzi. Now, this is not a good model for the science nerds of any age. As the 1500s turns into the 1600s, this profile began to present serious drawbacks and limitations. Until about 1600, the posture of the Venetian party towards science was one of more or less open hostility, favoring black magic. But in the early 1600s, the group around Sarpi succeeded in changing their public profile from being the enemies of science to being the embodiment of the most advanced and sophisticated science. For several centuries after this, the Venetians would work inside the scientific community to take it over. They would claim to represent the highest expression of scientific values. In this way, they could institutionalize the dead hand of formalism, the fetishism of authority, and irrationalism, so as to stifle the process of discovery. The chief of Venetian intelligence in this period, who made this possible, was Paolo Sarpi. Sarpi and his friend Fulgencio Micanzio were Servite monks. Sarpi was part of an important Venetian salon of the day, the Ridotto Morosini, which met for discussions in the palace of the Morosini family on the Grand Canal. The Morosini were the direct ideological heirs of Contarini. The Morosini salon centered on a discussion of science, and it became a nucleus for the youthful faction of the Venetian oligarchy, the so-called giovani, who became powerful especially after 1582. The giovani favored a policy of cooperation with Holland, England, and France in conflicts against the Austrian and Spanish Habsburgs and against the papacy. There was another faction called I Vecchi, the oldies, which serviced the Venetian network on the Spanish and papal side, and these, of course, were quite extensive. Now, we have told in other locations how Sarpi organized and unleashed the 30 Years' War in Central Europe, using agents like Max von Thurn und Taxis, Christian von Anhalt, Christoph von Dohna, the Elector Palatine Frederick, the so-called Winter King. In this sense, Paolo Sarpi personally exterminated about 1/3 of the entire population of Europe and about 1/2 of the population of Germany and surrounding areas. Sarpi also caused the assassination of King Henry IV of France when Henry opposed Sarpi's designs and exposed him as an atheist. Paolo Sarpi, as we can see, is a worthy predecessor for Bertrand Russell. Now, Sarpi in his own time was most proud of his reputation as a mathematician. One contemporary wrote of him, "I can say about him without any exaggeration whatsoever that no one in Europe excels him in his knowledge of the mathematical sciences." Who thought that? That is the view of Sarpi held by Galileo Galilei. Sarpi.
Wow.
So it's a real Game of Thrones type
Absolutely.
situation, and we're talking about private families,
The mega uber
the
elite.
throne behind the throne,
Yep.
behind the throne,
Yep.
behind the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes way back.
Yeah. Really, a lot of these philosophical developments and kind of ruling ideologies of the Venetian oligarchs percolated through England and into more modern thinkers like Malthus and his influence through the 19th century and on various thoughts about basically supplanting this idea of expansion and discovery and growth and replacing it with a scarcity psychosis, which has been proven wrong over and over and over again, but it still lingers because the same oligarchical residues from history
Yeah.
continue to contour all of the world power centers.
Yeah. So it's almost like some sort of weird constant that
Right.
that we as humans, for whatever reason, have to endure, and it's like it's a pattern that people pick up, you know, through time.
Yes.
And it's like a particular pattern on a species of chicken or cow that returns every generation or so, and it just manifests this evil, right?
Theme, variation, recapitulation, definitely. There's, aspects of the sort of mathematicization of facts that you see within Sarpi and then also Newton and Galileo as basically being the forerunners to the Michio Kakus and the Neil deGrasse Tysons and Bill Nyes of today. Now, granted, they're much more sort of derivative spokespeople.
Yeah.
They're not really necessarily part of the same echelon of and entailed in the craftsmanship
No,
of
they
the
don't get to
ideology.
create
Right.
the agenda. They just adopt
They just
it, and they get to
regurgitate
be
and expand on it. Yeah.
the latest and greatest science celebrity
Right.
to pitch the latest form of authoritarianism. It's just
Yeah.
extremely irksome that
This
things
recapitulation
like
keeps
gravity,
coming around. Yep.
things like gravity, heliocentrism,
Atomic theory.
climate change,
Yep.
weather.
Yeah.
It all they're
all
like
conforms
brothers and
to- yep.
sisters with authoritarianism, and I'm
Yep.
just like, what is this all getting to? And it is exterminism
Yep.
at the end of the day. It is
That's right.
murder. It is
Genocide.
genocide, right? So I want to move to another clip on that subject.
Definitely. That whole lecture series is extremely informative.
No, my God, it's so
really-
information dense.
It's
and,
incredible.
And if anything, people realize, the oligarchs of today, I mean, they are blood, they are the ultimate genealogists, right? They
Right.
are obsessed with blood. They're
Yep.
obsessed with genetics and their heritage.
Purity,
they know
complexes,
their
yeah.
family history. They know
Yeah.